Could we see Shane Baz up with the Rays soon? Find out next on Fantasy Baseball Today in 5. Welcome into FBT in 5 on Saturday, June 22nd. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Scott White and 5 prospects on the verge. James Wood of the Nationals, Noelvi Marte of the Reds, Shane Baz of the Rays. Kind of cheating. I know he's not a prospect anymore, but just barely, so stick with us. Christian Scott with the Mets and Kobe Mayo with the Orioles. Scott, what do you think needs to happen for Shane Baz to get the call?
For Shane Baz to get the call, I think the Rays need to decide that they're ready to turn the page on either Aaron Savale or Zach Littell. Savale's just been horrible, so maybe he's the more sensible choice. Littell's been kind of meh lately and has more bullpen experience, so maybe he's the right call because they could just bump him into the bullpen. Savale, it'd be less clear what they did with him, but they're both weighing the Rays down, and they need to make up some ground in the standings, and Baz is much better. I mean, Baz had seemingly already earned his spot in the rotation when he succumbed to Tommy John surgery 2 years ago. His first 8 major league starts, he had a 2.61 ERA, 0.97 whip, 10.9 K per 9. And remember, this was a guy coming into 2022 was considered the second best pitching prospect by most publications after only Grayson Rodriguez. His 9th major league start was a disaster and kind of skewed the numbers. And then he had Tommy John surgery. So I think it's fair to dismiss it and just look at those numbers I rattled off for his first 8 starts. Really impressive stuff from Shane Baz. And his last 3 minor league starts here. His rehab assignment's over. He got optioned because he wasn't quite ready yet. But the last 3 starts in the minors this year, he's looked much better. He's got that fastball averaging 96, peaking at 99 like before the injury. The control has been a lot better, getting a lot of whiffs with the slider. Not throwing the curveball as much and hitting the slider. He kind of uses both. Had a 40% whiff rate on each last time we saw him. So maybe he needs to mix in the curveball a little more. Does Baz before the Rays pulled the trigger, but he's cleared the biggest hurdles, clearly, in his recovering from Tommy John, and we need to start thinking about stashing him in fantasy again. If I could just make a couple quick points here about a couple others in my 5 on the verge. James Wood is back from the minor league IL. Remember, he was out 3 weeks with a hamstring injury, and he's come back playing left field. He was more center field before that. And Mark Zuckerman of Masson seems to think they're playing him left so that because that's where he'd fit in the outfield alongside Jacob Young and Lane Thomas. Eddie Rosario has dropped off since then. He's kind of a wasted spot in the Nationals lineup. So they could use James Wood. Meanwhile, Noelvi Marte, not great numbers on his minor league rehab assignment since he's coming back from a PED suspension. But, that kind of makes sense. Obviously, he's getting back into the swing of things. Eligible to return Thursday. So I think he'll be back Thursday, regardless of how the next few games go. And could be an impactful player for you at third base.
Yeah. Should we call that a suspension assignment? It's not a rehab assignment, I guess. But I hope we see Noelvi Marte when first eligible. That would be a potential boost in fantasy. 5 prospects on the periphery. Lots of interesting names here. Jean-Kency Noel of the Guardians, Owen Casey of the Cubs, Brandon Sproat of the Mets, Bryce Matthews of the Astros, and Moises Ballesteros of the Cubs. I read your article, your prospect report, which I encourage everybody else to do as well. Brandon Sproat, you said, might be the crown jewel of the Mets prospect farm system, even higher than Christian Scott. That's pretty high praise.
Yeah, well, the Mets are building a reputation as an organization that's good at developing pitching, and Brandon Sproat seems to be the crown jewel there. His numbers in the minors, at last look, it was an ERA south of 150, and that's pitching most recently at AA. So he's not overpowering a bunch of 19-year-olds at this point. He's got a fastball that hits triple digits, blows it by hitters up in the zone. His changeup is a true knee buckler of a pitch. And I'm seeing a lot of buzz for Brandon Sproat, suggesting he needs to be mentioned among the best pitching prospects, regardless of organization.
Wow.
So he's a big riser for me. Jean-Kinsey Noel is a player who popped an A-ball as a 19-year-old, put up ridiculous numbers then, and got picked up in some dynasty leagues. The next couple years, he was exposed as somebody with bad pitch recognition, bad swing decisions, put up bad numbers. But that's all turned around this year as he's advanced to AAA. Huge power, and especially over the last month or so, this is an observation, I guess I should say, from Chris Clegg. Over the last month, his chase rate is way down, his zone contact rate way up, close to 90%.
Wow.
And he's generating huge exit velocities. I think Jean-Kinsey Noel could make an impact for the Guardians in like a Franmil Reyes sort of way, if you remember him. He had some seasons of note for fantasy. And I guess I'll leave off here with Moises Ballesteros of the Cubs. Really short, thick-bodied guy, kind of a Alejandro Kirk comp there, and has really good bat control the way Kirk does too. Makes a lot of contact. I was watching some highlights of him. It's almost surgical how he handles the barrel of the bat. Like he's good at. It's not just haphazard contact. Like he seems to have a plan behind where he hits the ball. And that helped him hit for the cycle, even with that really thick body. His second to last game at AA. He's now up at AAA as a 20-year-old. You don't see that for catchers very often. Wow. Cubs are not exactly settled at catcher at the major league level. I don't know that Moises Ballesteros is up to the challenge defensively, but he's a really interesting bat.
All right. For more extensive fantasy baseball coverage, listen to the Fantasy Baseball Today podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the Odyssey app, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Thanks for listening to Fantasy Baseball Today in 5, and we will be back again next week. Bye-bye.